And some of you may want to go to that. I know that our speaker, Dr. Vitkus, would like to go to that, but he has family duty, so he's not going to be able to do it. Anyway, let me get my notes. As many of you know, I'm Jim Rich, and I'm the coordinator of this forum on civil discourse and dissent, confronting polarization.
Into the bike.
Thank you, Bob. This is one of the first community forums by the new Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland. Wow, that's good. Thank you for attending. We welcome our partners from the UU Society of Cleveland Heights. Together, we offer topics of interest, of current interest as a service to our congregation and the community. Civil discourse has become increasingly difficult politically in our individual social networks and families. Today, we want to explore ways to resolve opposing points of view in an equitable, peaceful, mutually supportive way. How can discussion be encouraged in a healthy, respectful way? Our speaker is Dr. John Vitkus, a clinical psychologist with a BA in psychology from Northwestern and a PhD in personality psychology from Stanford. He couldn't explain so I could understand it what personality psychology is. Maybe he can explain it.
It's because we don't know.
He has practiced with the Cleveland Clinic for 20 years, counseling patients on a variety of issues, including marital, family, and relationship difficulties and anger management. He counseled me on anger management and had limited success. He is also an assistant professor at the Lerner College of Medicine. John, his wife Lisa, and their children Allison and Ian enjoy living in Shaker Heights. It's a wonderful place to raise children, as I'm sure John will agree.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
John will speak for about 20-25 minutes, then we will open the floor for questions. Please save your questions for the Q&A. Dr. Vitkus?
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. If I'm speaking for 25 minutes, I'll be speaking pretty quickly, so just be prepared for that. First of all, thank you for having me here. Thank you, Jim, Ken, Marlene, Wayne, thank you very much for putting this together. Thank you very much for having something like this. This is what the communities need, is a place to talk together and a place where people can hear different views in a semi-formal arrangement. This is actually, I would call this a semi-formal event here. And we'll talk about different kinds of relationships, different kinds of interactions, semi-formal being one of them. So I mean that in a technical sense as well as a real sense. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
First of all. Excellent, excellent. Okay, as Jim mentioned, I'm a psychologist at Cleveland Clinic, and we live in Shaker Heights. A little bit about the bio of our children. I often joke that the Chamber of Commerce for Cleveland should say that Cleveland's a great place to live, but you wouldn't want to visit. It's a great place to raise children, absolutely fantastic. Our daughter's a paleontologist who lives in Alberta now, and our son is a airline schedule, not airline, but a private airline, Warren Buffett's NetJets. So he's an airline scheduler for NetJets, so in Columbus. So it's been great for them. They've loved it. Okay, civil discourse is a topic today. Welcome to my practice. Okay, this is my psychology practice. This is actually true. Okay, so last week, the last patient I had, excuse me, the last patient I had on Friday was a police officer. Okay, who, among other problems and other issues, he felt almost paralyzed in his job by thoughts and visions of the protests around Ferguson, and now he can't do anything in his job for fear of doing the wrong thing and being not only punished and sanctioned, but being held publicly vilified in the media. Okay. That was the last person I had on Friday. First person on Saturday, a young man who was beaten by 5 police officers at his mother's home. He was smoking marijuana. His mother didn't like that. She called the police, and he was beaten by 5 cops in Youngstown, Ohio. So, my job is to have interactions where both of these people feel heard, validated, and safe. That is my job. I need to make connections with everyone. It's a little easier for me, frankly, okay, because I get a lot of practice. And I have to follow certain rules, ethical standards, certain personal standards, but the nice thing is that over time, once I practice those rules, they become my standards. And I really don't think about them very much. When HIPAA came out in 1996, the privacy law for medicine, we psychologists said, we've always been doing that. This is nothing new to us. If you really want psychological change, you have to get rid of the idea in the movies and TV about the Freudian thing, about laying on a couch and coming up with some sort of wonderful insight and then getting off and solving the world's problems. Okay? The truth is, people like the experience of psychodynamic therapy. It's very educational, it's very informative for them, it's probably valuable in many different ways, but when they get off the couch, they do the same thing they did before. So change really starts with behavior. It's what the AA people would call fake it till you make it. You change the fake it till you make it. You change the behavior first, even though you don't believe it, even though you don't think that way, even though you don't feel that way. You change it anyway, and eventually it comes around. So when we're going to ask you to do things or suggest different things of how to behave differently, even if it doesn't feel quite right, even if you don't think it's quite right, give it a try anyway, and you might find it. Okay, are we all familiar with the Serenity Prayer? I assume we are. Right. Grant me this, in a Unitarian church, I wasn't quite sure about the God part, so it's, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Okay. Now, a lot of the beginning of my talk is about things we cannot change. It's about why civil discourse is eroded in recent years, recent decades. Okay. So I'm going to go through that pretty quickly because, frankly, there's not a whole lot we can do about it as individuals. Well, there kind of is, but it's a different topic. Also, it's not really my area. Okay, I'm not a political scientist. I'm not a sociologist. That's really not my area. Okay, so I'm going to focus on the second part, the courage to change the things I can. And that word courage is probably the most underutilized, undervalued word in the Serenity Prayer. Doing things like coming to an event, doing things like having a hard conversation, doing things like starting an interaction with someone you really are having problems with an apology of your own. In fact, I'll start with my own apology here. Okay? I apologize for my picture in the program, which I think is a bit of a bait and switch. It's 20 years old. Sorry. This guy is 20 years older. He's 70 pounds heavier. Sorry about that. If you're expecting some younger guy, I apologize. Okay.
Can I break in for a second? John and his wife Lisa went to some pains to take an up-to-date picture, which we declined to use. We used the old one.
Well, I like it better too, although it may be a bit inaccurate.
Do you admit that to Lisa?
Now, why didn't I mention that Jim did that? Okay? Because part of discourse is to avoid blaming. Part of discourse is to take responsibility yourself and don't put it on other people. That's part of it. And the wisdom to know the difference. And hopefully we'll go through several different situations where the level of our input into this discourse varies. Sometimes we have very little input, sometimes we have a lot. And we'll go over that. Okay. The erosion of civil discourse. I can go through this quickly because I think this is a story we all know. Okay. News is entertainment. Okay. Remember the old days when Walter Cronkite came on for half an hour a day? People wanted to listen to the news. They were looking forward to it. Now, with 24-hour news, it's not so interesting. It has to be entertainment now. Eliminating other points of view, we'll talk about that. And one-way communication with our new technology. Okay, news is entertainment. We have more options. Issues reduced to catchy sound bites because we're so busy thinking about a million different things. A need to capture a market share, not just simply to inform us, with journalistic integrity. Now they have to be successful. They have to be popular and exciting. And it requires an entertainment quality for some of those reasons. Okay. Moving on. Eliminating other points of view. A handout that Jim presented me was very interesting. It was on, among other things, it mentioned disinviting speakers. When I graduated from Northwestern, the speaker was George Shultz, who was soon to become the Secretary of State in about a month or so. And there was lots of protests about him on campus. But those protesters were polite and civil and stayed outside the arena and didn't mess up my graduation. That was very nice, okay? Nowadays, people are being disinvited, people are being pushed to cancel their engagements and speaking engagements because some people in the community don't want to hear their points of view. This is not going to help civil discourse, okay? This is another version of one-way communication. Okay? And among those people who were disinvited recently, Secretaries of State Kissinger, Madeleine Albright, Condoleezza Rice, both sides of the aisle here. Okay. Pulitzer Prize winners George Will, conservative, and Anna Quindlen, liberal, both sides of the aisle. Okay. Talking over and shouting down views you don't like. I was shocked, as the writer was, in that handout that Jim provided for me. 51% of college students think it's acceptable to shout down a speaker.
Oh, wow.
20% even think it's acceptable to use violence to stop them from speaking. A little scary, okay. And these are college students, okay. There are people on other sides of the political spectrum who believe similarly, but may use different tactics, okay. And finally, one-way communication. With our modern technology, it's a marvel. I was in the shower this morning thinking of a couple new slides I wanted to present today. Got downstairs, typed them in, saved them on my PowerPoint, plugged them in here, and here we are, okay. Including the Serenity Prayer. That was in the shower this morning. So modern communication, modern devices are really wonderful, but they have some drawbacks, okay. Remember the old days of essays and letters? Those are one way, but people kind of understood it. Now we have text and emails, which I prefer. Kids prefer it. My children will always tell me, oh, we don't text because we like one-way communication. We text because it's convenient and you can text someone even when they're busy and they get back to you. Yeah, that's not how they do it. They do it because they like the one-way communication. They like saying what they want to say without having to be responsible for responding to it. That's what they like. But there's a problem, of course, is that when you have a text or an email, the other person is reading it, excuse me, in the frame of mind of the other person, not the person who wrote it. So there are many miscommunications, many misunderstandings, and because it's a one-way thing, there's no way to correct it. And that misunderstanding gets fostered on. So as much as you can, as much as you hate it, as much as I hate it, frankly, try to call. Have a personal connection. And finally, social media. People will, especially the people whose spouses have gone off to a high school flame, will say what a horrible thing Facebook is. Okay. Well, Facebook is a powerful tool, very powerful. It can be used for good or evil like any tool. Okay. And of course we have different versions of our social media, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter and tweets, which we all know about, as a way of communicating in a one-way direction. Okay. So why is it important? Come up with a quote here. Freedom of speech is a principal pillar of a free government. When this support is taken away, the constitution of a free society is dissolved and tyranny is erected on its ruins. This quote by Ben Franklin in 1737. Okay. So 50 years before the Constitution was written. A man ahead of his time. Okay. And probably the last thing I want to talk about in the erosion of civil discourse is the idea of winning or being right. Okay. That's more important than fairness, more important than listening, more important than informing. If the information is not what we want people to hear, we just dismiss it as non-information, fake news. More important than friendship, okay? More important than family. Okay. People get on this train of trying to be right. Men more than women. We'll get to that in a little bit. Okay. More important than society in general. So, a concern for the nation's Washington's farewell address warned of the dangers of party factionalism and of prioritizing personal goals and agendas ahead of the continued health of the Republic. Okay, 1796. A lesson from Cliff and Clack. When I first moved to Cleveland in 1995, this is these prestigious, journals I look at, right? When I first moved to Cleveland in 1995, the first thing I read, well, one of the first things, was the syndicated column by the Car Talk guys, Cliff and Clack. Okay. And here's the little column I happened to catch that first day here in Cleveland. Husband wrote in to say that he and his wife disagreed about something. It was overdrive on a Ford station wagon, doesn't matter. So they disagreed about something, and the husband said, so who's right? Okay, which is a very male question, by the way. So who's right? I thought the wisdom of Ray's answer was terrific. I'm going to ask you a very important question. Would you rather be right, or would you rather be happy? And then Tom chimes in, and in this case, you're neither. But there's a need to prioritize our friendships, our family, above being right, above getting our way, above having the say. That's really the key to civil discourse, is prioritizing the discourse itself over what we have to say in our one-sided view. And we have, this one, I need to zip along here. Okay, so what can I do now? Okay. When people come to my office, my psychology office, and everyone asks the same question, why? Why does he do this? Why can't she understand? Blah, blah, blah. Why? And they don't like my answer, which is, that's the wrong question. It's very unsatisfying. Because usually we'll never know why, exactly. Or it doesn't matter because we can't change it. So the better question is, what can I do now? So what kind of discourse is this? There are 4 kinds of discourse that I kind of came up with last night. And here they are. Formal, public and structured. Semi-formal, like this. Okay, business, public meetings. Informal, friendship, cocktail parties, things like that. Talking with friends. And then intimate, partners, spouses, family, things like that. 4 different levels. And what's required of us in our role as maintaining social discourse varies and increases as we go down the list. Okay. So in formal public structured things, there are prescribed rules for discourse. Okay? Either there's a debate format, Robert's Rules of Orders, or a higher authority, a judge, a police officer, something like that, who will tell you what to do, and strict consequences for breaking the rules. It pretty much eliminates spontaneous give and take and a flow of ideas, but that's not the goal of those situations. And it requires the least effort of me, okay? Only to obey the rules, which some people can't do, but most people can. Okay. In semi-formal, in semi-formal situations, strong but less formal rules. If anyone has seen Big Bang Theory, Sheldon has a hard time understanding these unwritten social rules. Is this one of those social rules people know about that he doesn't quite get, right? This poor guy, he's on the autism spectrum. Okay, so less formal rules, but still there's some consequences for breaking them, especially at work, if you misbehave at work. Okay. There's some spontaneous give and take. Hopefully you have some question and answer here today, and a flow of ideas. And sometimes effort is required of me, especially if there's a difficult person I'm dealing with at work or in a meeting or something. But usually it's pretty well taken care of. Okay. Informal, friendships, social gatherings. Rules are more social, less formal. There are variable consequences for breaking rules. Sometimes there are none. Sometimes you get shunned by your friends, etc. Usually that occurs in an accumulated method over time. It allows greater give and take and flow of ideas, which is great. That's the whole goal of it. But if people start going off the rails, they go off the rails. Okay. If another breaks the social rules. So what I recommend to people is to stop the discussion. There's a power in doing nothing, and a power in not letting a discussion be controlled by emotions. So when I say stop the discussion, sometimes that's temporary. You know what? You seem a little hot right now. You seem a little emotional, let's take a break, come back in 10 minutes. And maybe we can talk about this a little more rationally. Because the emotional systems in our body are quicker than the cognitive systems in our body. So let's let the cognitive systems catch up a little bit and let those emotions die down a little bit. Okay? Or leave completely. I will often recommend to people with, let's say difficult in-laws, when you're at dinner, Thanksgiving dinner, or any other dinner for that matter, park in the street, don't park in the driveway, know where your coats are, and maybe right in the middle of passing the potatoes, if someone drops a bomb, you say, you know what, gotta go. No explanation, no nothing, just get up and go. You and the kids and everybody. Okay. Just stop the discussion, because at that point, any discussion will be counterproductive. And then come back later. Okay. Moderate to strong effort required by me, especially if there's a difficult person I'm dealing with. Okay. Here's a quote from my wife's first boss, psychiatrist out in California. And a book to look at if you have problems with difficult people who always seem to come. I always think that these people should have the Miranda warning on their forehead. Anything you say can and will be used against you. He said, when you deal with, it's hard for me to do it without the accent. He's from Colombia, South America. So when you deal with difficult people, you can't just confront them directly because their egos can't take it. You must gently put your arm around their shoulders, walk in the same direction, and gradually turn them around. This often, basically boils down to buttering up narcissists is what it was. But that's what it is. Because, well, you don't have to, of course, but if the whole goal is to have a discourse and to put someone in a situation where they're comfortable enough to be with you. Because don't forget that narcissists, although they come off as all sort of arrogant and powerful, they're actually quite insecure, and they can't handle opposing opinions. Herman Garcia is his name. Okay. And finally, intimate relationships with partners and families, mostly held in private, which has its good or bad parts, allows greater depth and exchange of ideas, also allows for abuse and differential power to be quite imposing. Again, if things aren't going well, it's best to stop the discussion. Okay? Take a little break for 10 minutes, walk around the block, do something else, and come back. And then Gottman's four horsemen of the apocalypse is what happens with marriages. That's the most effort required by me on an ongoing basis because there are no formal rules. Everything is made up ad hoc as we go along in this relationship together. Let's get to those four horsemen. Let's see. So one thing, if you're having problems with someone of the opposite sex, and I hate this, it sounds so sexist, and I think it is sexist. And I hate doing that. My first job in New York City was at Barnard College. And in fact, I'll be moving out to Utah at the end of the summer, following my wife who got a job at Intermountain Healthcare, who'll be starting in a couple weeks. So I'm dropping everything, including this practice I really like, by the way. I'm dropping everything to go out and be with her. Why? Because I dragged her to California, New York, and Cleveland, so it's my turn to get dragged somewhere, so that's fine. That's fine. And yet, there's a sex difference that I believe is really true. The more conventional, the more traditional the couple, the truer it is. Okay. Men engage in report talk. They think about tasks, duties, achievements. They think about things. It's the Joe Fridays, just the facts man, right? That's what they want. They fear being a failure. Women, in contrast, engage in report talk. They're motivated by connections, by relationships, by understanding each other, by putting you in their situation. They want you to understand them. Their fear is being isolated and alone. When stress occurs, usually this disagreement comes up where the man will disengage. John Gray of the Mars and Venus book says men go to the caves. True enough. And the women feel alone. Well, that's their worst fear. So they pursue and follow, making the guy feel like a failure. And on it goes. So you have to be careful. A little break, let the emotions die down, is a good thing. Okay. I mentioned before John Gottman's four horsemen of the apocalypse. Contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling. The checks are all the ones, thank you, the checks are all the ones that involve some sort of judgmentalism, some sort of criticism, some sort of bias toward the person, some sort of blaming. And those are the most common. Of all these, the most dangerous one is contempt. Okay. So elements of a healthy discourse. Okay. Don't blame the person, like with the picture business. No, don't blame. Take responsibility instead. Okay. Listen before speaking. And empathize and accept. And finally, be ready to apologize. Which is hard for men, especially. Don't blame takers. When couples come to me for marital therapy, I first start off with them by saying, I don't believe in fault. And they look at me like I'm saying, I don't believe in error. Because fault runs their relationship. But fault is only for the benefit of the ego of the person complaining. It doesn't help the situation. It doesn't help the relationship. I believe in responsibility. That I believe in. But not fault. I'd let go of it. So I have things like name 5 good things about your partner. Get him thinking in the positive direction, not the negative one so much. Hey, what is my role? I mean, what is my responsibility? How did I contribute to whatever problem is going on here? Okay. Listen before speaking. Again, the importance of what you don't say. There are many times my friends will talk about things. I've got friends of different political persuasions. I'm very pleased to be actually the leader of a couple hobby groups here in Cleveland with a lot of very conservative members, gun owners, ex-military, this sort of thing. And I love having that diversity. But occasionally opinions will come up where we don't agree. Depends on the situation, but if we're sitting over a couple beers at Winking Lizard after the chapter meeting every month, it is not the time to bring up a debate. Okay? Sometimes it's important what you don't say. Whenever I try to explain myself after the fact, try to apologize, explain why I did something wrong, it just gets worse. This is what I do to get the cut signal to people. I visualize myself holding a shovel and digging myself in deeper. It just gets worse. So just keep that to yourself. Okay. Empathy, acceptance. Listen to the other side so they feel you understand me. Okay. There is some empathic component to the acknowledgement that matters and that people respond to. So people really respond to empathy. There's a thing in psychology called the dodo effect.
The what?
The dodo effect, like a dodo bird, right? Which kind of therapy works best? I got a little bit more, Jim, so okay. A little bit more. Which kind of therapy works best? Freudian psychodynamics, behaviorism, etc. The answer is it doesn't really matter. What matters most are the qualities of the therapist, being empathic, warm, and genuine. That's what counts. And that's what counts in relationships outside the office too. Okay. And then finally, David Burns, we won't have time to go through this. Sorry about that. I just wanted to end up with the, there's a whole bunch of this stuff here. I'll just skip through this. Sorry about that. And then finally, be ready to apologize. Okay. This is a program of the clinic, the HEART program. Hear, empathize, apologize, respect, and then thank. Be ready to apologize. My wife had a nurse come up to her. Actually, the nurse didn't come up to her. My wife heard about the nurse being upset. And my wife took the initiative, much smarter than I am. She took the initiative to go to the nurse and apologize for what she was upset about. She was upset about a statue in her office that she thought was demeaning and ridiculing. This is a time when the blackface issues were going on, right? And here's the statue that the nurse saw in her office. Okay? If you could read the bottom, it says, "Greetings from Uganda." Her assistant administrator was from Uganda. This is a present she brought from her family, from Uganda. But the nurse thought it was blackface. Okay? So my wife, instead of defending herself, instead of justifying it, instead of saying how wrong the nurse was, she apologized. "I'm so sorry this offended you. I'm so sorry you feel bad about it." And they had a really nice conversation. And then the nurse said, "Oh, well, this is great. This is not at all what I thought it was." But my wife took it home anyway. Because for that one nurse that she heard about and had to go track her down, there must be at least 10 others that she doesn't hear from. So she takes it upon herself, it's her job not to create problems. So she starts with an apology, which is really helpful for discourse. Now, I find I had a hard time coming up with who said this exactly. I thought it was Ben Franklin, it's not. Thomas Jefferson had a similar thing, but his is a little pointed. But I've come up with just rephrasing it for myself. And this helps me as a male feel like I'm succeeding by being patient, by giving in, by apologizing. I'm succeeding in doing what I want to do. I treat every person I meet with respect, not because of who they are, but because of who I am. And that's what I do. And I have some references. Okay. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, John. I suspect you've generated a lot of questions, and we have two of our members who will be circulating. Debbie and Marlene have marks, and they will be wandering around. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and Marlene or Debbie will give you a mic. Debbie goes first with Mark. And we have, if you're not on our sign-up list, please sign up. And there's some copies of our orange brochure that will tell you what's coming up. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Don't just shout out, because if you just shout out your question, we can't capture it on our tapes. And Debbie and Marlene will select people in turn, so you will get a chance to, most people I hope will get to ask their questions. Please keep your questions short and ask focused questions. We do not want speeches. Speeches just waste other people's time. Mark.
Well, I must confess that on my Facebook page, I have violated all the precepts. I wanted your opinion on what you think about this. The end of the fairness doctrine by President Reagan, maybe more than 30 years ago, and the rise of single-issue politics, where issues are seen not in terms of policy differences, but in terms of morality, good and evil, and how that has altered and changed public discourse. Please.
Excellent question about the ending of the fairness doctrine. So now we have single viewpoint. This is basically what started Fox News. What allowed Fox News to develop is having a single opinionated viewpoint that didn't have to have equal time for the opposite view. My knowledge comes from the movie Vice, so that's sort of my level of knowledge here. Okay.